8th, beginning at 5:30 p.m. at Student Service Center. Let the record reflect that we do have a quorum, and we will move on to item 3, prayer and pledge.
Sir, Dr. Fuller will take care of that for us this evening.
I'll start with the prayer. Dear Lord, we ask you for your blessing on this meeting. We ask that your wisdom would guide us as we seek to accomplish the goals on today's agenda. We lift each member of our staff, students, as well as every member of the board, and ask for continued blessings over each and every one of them. Thank you for the opportunities you give for us to serve our essential needs. Please rise for the pledge.
Flagpole is that direction.
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. On the Texas flag, I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
Thank you, Dr. Fuller. We will move on to item 4, public comments. Ms. Colas?
No public comments.
No public comments? That's done there. We'll move on to item 5, board training, ECISD training. We have some fine people from Region 20 to facilitate that training, so appreciate y'all being here and helping us out with this today. And I guess let's get it going.
All right, that's great. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate it. It's good to see you. This is actually, I think, only our second training that we're doing face to face. So just we're going to ask up front our apologies. It's been a year since we've been allowed to be with human beings. And so we've only seen you on the screen. So if we forget something, please correct us. Please also help us because we also have a mask. So if it's hard to hear, please tell me, hey, can you speak up a little bit or whatever, so that we can do that. Got it. Okay, we'll do. So that we can repeat to make sure that everybody's hearing what we have to say. Also, just for the general public and community to know that we have 2 board members that are not with us tonight because they've already done this training. So this is just to bring the rest of the group up to speed. So that now the whole board will have completed this required training, which is evaluating and improving student outcomes that's required of the board every 2 years. So you guys actually did this the first time back in 2018, and I believe we actually did it with you guys back in the boardroom. So it's now time, 2 years have flown, and we'll cover some of this content. Some of it you will remember we covered last time, but we'll put the addition of the things that have happened in the 2 years that are now requirements for school boards. We also, let me introduce first of all my colleague, D'Angelo Eslak. So D'Angelo, you want to introduce yourself?
Glad to be here with you. Sorry I wasn't here last time, but my colleague got that lucky draw to be here with you instead of you being here. I've been at Region 20 about 12 years now, working with boards probably 10 of those years. So glad to be here. Anything to go Maggie.
We're going to try to reduce it so that we put the East Central flavor, make those connections with the good work that your folks are doing. Because y'all have been on top of it. Y'all have looked at local accountability, your scorecard, all of those things. Those are important. We all have opinions about the legislature who is in session, silence for them. And also the agency that particularly coming off of Tuesday's wonderful experience with testing. Another moment of silence there. So we do not work with PPA. So just a reminder about that, but we certainly work with PPA and we work with our school district. So with that, evaluate and please stop and ask questions. It's based on knowledge, it's based on skills, and it's based on mindset. And this particular visual is purposely provided up to them. So as a trustee, there are some things you need to know. Okay, how to run a meeting, how to do a motion, there's knowledge pieces, what the laws are in terms of running board meetings, etc. There are skills that you have as trustees. I'm going to ask you about those in a minute. And there is mindset. And mindset is how you think about the work that you do. So, we talked a little bit about knowledge. What are some skills that effective school board members exhibit? What do you think those are?
Making sure that the superintendent is conducting business with our district properly.
Okay, so understanding what lane the board is in and what lane the superintendent is in. And one of those things that the superintendent responds responsible
and his staff. Not speaking of our spoon and soup, it's not our done.
Great. That's a great example of that. So it's understanding where the line is, understanding what our role is and what our role isn't. So for example, it's not your role to hire the staff that the superintendent hires. You approve those based on the recommendations, but you don't go out, interview, and do all. Your only single employee is the superintendent. So again, perfect example. One last one. What's another skill that you have with the community? Communication, okay? Listening, when you come to this table, is to be a voice for the community. For the whole community. The third one, mindset. So what's the mindset? What's the thinking you bring when you come to the table?
We're supposed to bring the viewpoint of the community to the school.
Okay. So you're thinking about all the people that you represent and all the people in the district. Community?
We don't represent anybody. We're trustees.
Okay.
We're here to hold and trust ability and make sure that the school district is, we oversee the management of the school district to make sure that there are good principles in place for making decisions.
And
Not
those
to make those decisions,
Right.
but to make sure that the superintendent has a reasonable process and an appropriate process, that we may not be on the bleeding edge of education, but we're certainly on the leading edge with programs that are properly researched and based in data.
And those become the components of the accountability that you have as trustees. Yeah, exactly. What's another mindset? What about a mindset around kids?
Also, to tag on what Steve said, and that's to make sure that we're providing, or joining in, providing the best education for our students. Making sure that they're getting everything they need. That we're hearing that from our superintendent and staff,
also learning that from the, all of the information that we get as far as, scores and all that, that we are able to understand all that and see where our students are heading. in education direction.
Absolutely. That's again, another form of accountability. It's another aspect of what the main business is, which is the education of kids and the effective education of kids. Great. So all of those things go together to hopefully affect adult behavior change. Okay, so it's always keeping in mind what's the knowledge, what are the skills, and what's the mindset that we have. And it's something that you do probably, number one, because you're an effective goal. Number two, you do it automatically. So one of the things we were talking about before the meeting started was this whole issue of how you click, because part of that is a common understanding and belief about where you're headed in terms of the district and what you value in terms of the kids, their education, and understanding the role of people. And when you look at this particular graphic, and it says school board behaviors that improve student outcomes are things such as working as a team, the synergy and teamwork, things such as establishing vision and goals, which you obviously do, and you have a strategic plan in place with a scorecard that is part of your local accountability. It's about the values, and y'all talked about that, representing the values of your community and the vision. That process, and there's the word, accountability. Okay? Accountability to the public and accountability to yourselves. And it's setting those outcomes, identifying what's non-negotiable, looking at monitoring that progress, and that leads to improving the student outcomes. Again, just a different way to display, because these, what's on here, this bottom part of the graphic is really the framework that the state board has laid out for school board. Any comments or reactions to that?
So taking it to the next step, you've seen this slide in the first round of the ECISD. And it talks about things that are inputs, outputs, and outcomes. When you look at the inputs, those are the resources and the things that you know of at the beginning of a cycle. So let's say, take your dinner tonight. What did the vendor have to know before that happened? What is the input they need to know?
How much you want to spend?
How much they have to know? Definitely. What else do they have to know? Affordable and easy, but what else? How many? What kind of soup? What kind of sandwich? So those are things that you know at the beginning, before it ever happens. And if you think about that in a school setting, think about the beginning of the year. The superintendent and staff, they talk about all the inputs. What do we need to put into this school year? How many teachers do we need? What's our schedule going to look like? What curriculum are we going to be using? Are we going to change anything or adjust anything to help our students move faster and further in their academic career? So those are things notable at the beginning. Outputs, let's think about on your way to Corpus Christi. You see all those little mile markers along the way. And you're going, oh, we're only at 100. Then it's, oh, we're at 50, yay! And as we get closer to the coast, we get happier because we're close, the mile numbers are going down. So it's a way to measure over time. That's a short amount of time, that's one road trip. But if you look at it in the school year, things that you measure over time would be things like, what could you measure over time in the school system? Student success. How would you measure student success? Maybe through the report cards, maybe through assessments, mid-year, beginning of the year, mid-year, end of year, things knowable over time. Are the children on track? And then there's outcomes. One and done at the end. You don't want a one and done. You want to know along the way the outputs. How are we doing all the way through? So there's no surprise at the end going, oh no, here's how this child did this year. So outcomes are things noble at the very end, and it's based on the child's intent. into a little bit further, other outcomes. There are many outcomes that are important in school systems. The budget outcome is important. The first grading is important. What other things are important outcomes that you have in school systems?
I didn't hear the two things that you mentioned.
What, I have green mask on, I'll take one down. So what other things are in the school system, are there? So let's,
Budget
besides budget,
and
Financial
And first?
accountability, or financial accountability.
financial accountability, what else? Thank you. Can you hear me better now?
Better.
Okay.
Lot. I mean,
Yes,
Well,
yes,
I can't remember it all.
Look, how does our maintenance fee look?
yes,
How are our facilities holding up? Do we need new facilities?
and those are
Do
important.
we need to replace air conditioners?
Those are very important outcomes. And Monique, you brought up a good point. There's a lot. And there's a lot for the superintendent and staff to focus on. So if we move it down to that last level, student outcomes. That's what boards are focused on. When boards focus on student outcomes improve. Because what happens in the boardroom trickles down all the way to the classroom. Because if it's being watched, monitored, results are going to skyrocket. Make sense? Thoughts between other outcomes that are very important and student outcomes. Any thoughts or questions about that?
So moving then on to everybody's favorite topic, student accountability, and the system that we have in place. So we're going to run through this one very quickly. What we want to hear about is, so what does that look like here in terms of your local accountability? Because we're very much aware that you have a scorecard. And that's what you've decided. Here's what's important to us. This is what we're accountable to our community. This is what, and it's not necessarily outside of this. This just seems very narrow. This seems very comprehensive when we look at the whole picture that you guys are constructing. So obviously we know our communities want us to be accountable. They want to know what happens when I send my kid to your school system. What are they learning? Are they being prepared for whatever they decide to do, whether it's to go to college, whether they decide to enter the military, whether they decide to enter a career, whatever they decide, are they prepared? That's what parents want to know. That's what the community wants to know in terms of, hey, when I read the paper, do I read good things? Or do I not? It's like, oh God, here we go, in the paper again, what happened? Okay. Which is not the case for Central, okay, which is great. But it is that sense of accountability. One of the things, and I think you probably remember this question before. So, text, that's the curriculum. Here's an example taken from 3rd grade math. Okay, this particular, and it says algebraic reasoning, so it's obviously in math. Algebra actually goes all the way down and all the way up through the math system. So when you think of early childhood, okay, so you think about kids in kindergarten, and you say, well, they can't be learning algebra. The answer is actually they are. Okay? And so think about, if you have a kindergarten kid, you go, oh my God, are they doing algebra? Here's how they're doing it. Think about your children, your grandchildren, or children you've seen at that age. When we ask them to group things together, like by light color, by shape, by pattern, or say, hey, what's next in the pattern? That's actually the beginning of algebraic thinking. And the reason it is because you're asking them to look for patterns. And in algebra, that's what that's based on, is pattern. So they call it algebraic reasoning. So here's a 3rd grade example. We ask students to represent 1- and 2-step problems involving addition and subtraction of whole numbers up to 1,000 using pictorial models, number lines, and equations. That's what the statement says. That's what the teachers have to cover. This is one of the many tell you too many. Okay. So here's an example of how a teacher might approach that. They would give this student in third grade 500 plus 300 minus 100 equals, and there may be a blank in there. Okay, so basically we call that computation. Add it up, subtract, figure out the answer. Okay? That's not too different than when you and I were in school. The only difference may be it may have been lined up this way, or it may be lined up this way. Either way, it's basic computation. Is there anything that strikes you as odd or different about that, or you've got questions about in terms of that example? Does it bother anybody?
It defies common sense to scare the hell out of a third grader and tell them you're going to be doing algebra in your teach test.
Right.
That's ludicrous.
So sometimes teachers don't even say that. They just say we're doing that. Okay? But in terms of teachers understanding that things are connected, and we're going to show that in a minute, this is how things are connected. Okay? So it's the same thing. Like when we begin to introduce kids in kinder to letters and to sound, we don't talk necessarily about, okay, we're going to make you a very strong reader, and this is how we're going to do it. Here's the concepts behind the reading growth and the blah, 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 blah. They don't need that. They're just learning the letters and facts. Okay. Here's an example now of how it's tested. So this is a live test question. They're no longer using it, so they won't, they're not giving anything away. But above the blue line is how this question was assessed. There's the text, the same statement that we were looking at, and there's the actual star question. This is third grade. Okay. So what strikes you about the question?
I wouldn't do it anyway.
Okay. Because the other way would be closer to measuring the computation. Absolutely.
I think it visually makes this looks scary. I mean, to a third time. I think it's impossible.
It's a lot.
But I mean, that just looks like, it almost looks visually like it's just this big, you know, instead of actually what it probably really is. But the other way makes this more common sense.
And it's scary with
Straightforward.
the lines.
Yeah.
Because I'm thinking, oh
And all
my
the
God, I'm
numbers.
gonna do all of
So it also clearly indicates that it doesn't matter whether or not you can compute. What matters is can they represent conceptual mathematical reasoning required to compute.
Absolutely.
Behavior.
So this is computation. Even though it says 1 to 2 steps, it's basically just solve. This is a process question. This is how do you set up an equation? Because I'm telling you, most third graders, unless their teacher has really explicitly told them the difference, is going to do this. They're going to answer each one, put in the number, and then the hand goes up and goes, this, how do I put this on the answer page? Because I have different answers. So which one do I grid? A, B, C, or D? Okay. Were they able to compute? Yeah, and they may have gotten it all right. But this asks a different question. It also is predicated on kids translating words in language, in English, to mathematical language. So take away becomes minus, loss becomes addition. And as my colleague always points out, broken crayons means you have more. I mean, truthfully,
it for some families.
because
They
you don't
have
throw broken crayons away. You just like, now I just have more. Where I had one, I now have 2 or 3. So how do you account for that? I mean, and I'm not making that up. That's a real thing. So it becomes a language. Now we're assessing authenticity.
So that question doesn't tell you whether a child has mastered what the teacher has taught. And that's, to me, the biggest issue with instruction.
Right.
Doesn't tell you how your teachers are doing, unless you force your teachers to teach to that.
Right.
And that's
And you're absolutely right, and here's the other scary thing. So I didn't teach my third grade kids this way. But when we analyze it and we get back, I learn and go, okay, now I gotta teach them this way. Yeah? Guess what happens? The next year, they don't put it this way. They put it using a pictorial. So now they have a picture. And it's like, oh,
And
okay.
then the next year, they move to the next on the number line.
And then the fourth year, they don't test it at all. Okay? So there's the beyond challenge, okay? And I'm not making it up. I'm just saying that's how it happens. And that's why when you begin to look at a local accountability system and you look at the whole picture, what are we doing day in and day out in our classrooms is a truer picture of how our kids are performing. This is that third grade hymn is Ed. This is how Ed felt on this day, one day out of 180 some odd days of instruction and 70 some odd days of instruction that we had. Sure hope you felt okay. Because if I don't feel good or whatever, I'm not even beginning to look at the academics. It's just I didn't feel like it.
And then you have students that are not tested.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Because I'm looking at this thing, I said, okay, what am I gonna first assess? Okay, look, I have 736, I've lost, there's gotta be a minus, but then I'm gonna have more, there's a plus. So you don't be answering on B. And then you gotta get the answer. If you have to decide whether it's a minus or a plus, or two minuses, two pluses, you have to eliminate all that and come up with, okay, I had 736, I lost 107, and I had 150. So the only one you're working on is B. But you're talking about,
An 8-year-old.
what I tell you, 60 years ago, that I graduated high school, which is 70, since I was in third grade, more or less. So I've had all those years to work on this. But as a 10-year-old, I have to deal with that, and it's got, not only that one, it's got many more. So I do.
Right. There's only one.
And it frees them out.
Absolutely. So unfortunately, even though, yeah, okay, it's designed for all these things, unfortunately, what it's not designed sometimes ends up being kids feel like it messes their words and it is not about their words at all. And honestly, just 30-second spot here. Is what kids in frustration on Tuesday that weren't able to sign on for a long time or were being kicked off. The same thing that we experienced in San Antonio in the snow bid, where the electricity kept going on and off, was basically what they experienced academically on Tuesday, if they were able to get on. Because in many cases, they were. So, I mean, talk about super frustration. But again, that's good. Two things. The performance labels, you've seen these before. Everything going from did not meet grade levels over on that end of the spectrum, over here, master's grade level, master's performance. And again, they're tied to, in this next slide, looking at the question that you asked earlier. So they designed this backwards. So they started with what did kids expected to do on the SAT, ACT, and then designed English 4, 3, 2, 1, all the way back down to third grade down to kindergarten. The same thing with mathematics, with science, and social studies. So in theory, all that works fine. But here's the reality. The texts are rewritten every 5 years. Every 5 years. So math goes through revision, and they don't do them all at the same time. They alternate a discipline. So a kid is in this system, whether it's in this school system or a different district. If they start with you in K, I'm not even going to talk about pre-K or 3. They're with you for basically 13 years. 2 to 3 times during a student's career, the texts change. And here's what happens during that change. Some of the math standards move down. Some of the math standards move up. And some of the math standards are voted off the island. Okay? So what happens is, poor Ed, third grader, okay? I'm exposed this year to my third grade, and the text changed over the summer, and we have new texts. Some of the fourth grade texts moved to third, but guess what? They passed me during the summer because I moved to fourth. And some of the third grade texts moved to now be fourth grade texts. So what happens? It says, Miss, I'm sorry, I think I covered this last year. Well, yes, you did. Okay? Thank you for remembering. We're going to cover it again. But the teacher has to also fill in, you were supposed to have this last year, but you didn't get it, but now here's the text, so we're going to have to not only cover this, but we have to cover the other. Okay? And that's where it becomes, it's just like that. But that happens. And again, it happens in each of the content areas. And again, that's what makes this a little bit of a challenge and makes teachers' jobs even harder.
So we're going to quickly look through the accountability system as it stood pre-COVID. Okay? So there were 3 domains. The first domain is student achievement. You want to go to the next slide? And when you look at student achievement, you can see that it was measured through STAR at elementary, middle, and high. And at high school level, they added college, career, military ready. And that also counts the same for the district. Okay? And
Sorry.
and you can go to the next one.
Okay.
And then here we have how it was actually scored, how they came up with the numbers. We'll go to the next slide to get your A to F for domain 1. And in college ready, we have things that they were looking at here. And you can see the meet TSI criteria, the meets criteria for 3 on AP or IB, and the list goes on. But at the bottom, they added in HB3 that was this last legislative session around the college career military outcomes bonus. And this is a higher standard, and that higher standard means that you have to, you can see the big word and. At the top it's or, but at the bottom the student has to meet both for the district to be eligible for extra funding.
And just curious, for you guys, what is that number more or less for college ready? You know, percentage wise? Recall.
For this,
I can get it for you. Okay, that's fine. If you don't have, I would expect that it would be, I think a lot of your kids earn at least one of these, so, but we'll, if you want to look, that's fine. Sorry, didn't mean to put you on the spot. We'll look at that, because what you're doing basically is you're looking at your whole graduating class and looking how many do they have at least, they have at least 1 under college ready, 1 under career ready, or 1 under military ready. And you have lots of kids that probably have some in multiple areas. Just for you guys to know that. But we'll come back to that.
And if you look at, this is the college ready now, and then you go to the next slide and it's the career ready. It's not like cover-all bingo for the kids. They could meet college ready, they could meet career ready, and they could join the military also, but it only counts 1 time per child. So here's what they're looking for career ready. And that would be industry certification, either level 1 or level 2 on a certificate. And the coherent sequence is out, so that was no longer being used. And then here you can see again on the bottom for the career ready, for the outcomes bonus, it's an and. So students have to meet TSI criteria in reading and math, either on the SAT, ACT, or TSIA, and have an industry certification or earn a level 1 or level 2 certificate. So it's very challenging. You have to watch the ands and the ors to see how does it really work together.
And obviously you're not going to have 245 different certifications that you're offering at your school district. And you're going to look at the ones that your community values, and so I'm sure they've increased over time, but again, it's what works for you guys. Is that fair, Roland? Okay.
And the 245 is the state approved pathways.
I think it's actually risen to 264. I think that is some.
And then of course, military ready. Now
it was going to be pre-COVID, that they needed to they were gonna tighten those restrictions where it wasn't just a self-report. It was going to be working with,
The Department of Defense, and the Department of Defense would not imagine that release who has been enlisted in the military because of confidentiality and safety precautions
Security, yeah.
and security. So that one's been put on hold, so we won't see anything on that coming out.
So CCMR lags 1 year. So the last reporting year that we have for that was in 2019. So in 2019, for the class of 2018, it was a year behind, it was 53% for the district. So that meant that 53% of the graduates had at least one of these, and probably a large portion even had multiples. So unfortunately, you don't get credit for the multiples, you just get credit for the one. And by that time, I think that was the second year we were into CCMR, if I remember correctly. So we were still learning the rules of the game. Now remember, in high school, to be true, you really have to go through the 4 years to get the full impact, because you're starting with a movement. It starts with the freshman and sophomore doing, and then you hit. So when you change the rules of the game in the middle, it makes it a little bit of a challenge. It used to be, when they came out with high school changes, they would say things like, effective with the freshman year beginning X, usually the year after the legislation, and they would raise it through the system. When they started with this, it was effective immediately. So then it was kind of like, okay, they're crossing the stage with a different set of rules that happened, not when they started as freshmen. So again, just something to keep in mind.
And so you would receive a letter grade for student achievement. Now, school progress, are you going to talk school progress? You want to talk closing the gap?
Got it. So school progress is basically academic growth from 1 year to the other for reading and math, and this impacts your basically your elementary and middle school. So you see where the kid is in 3rd grade in reading, and then see where they are in 4th grade, and did they improve or not. If they didn't improve, they get no credit. If they improve a little bit, they get half a point. If they move to the next category, they get a full point. So again, it's just about growth. What's been a challenge is that's important, and that honors the fact that kids grow from year to year. Beginning in 2019, remember I'm sorry, in 2020, we suspended the accountability system because of COVID. That was last year. We're doing the same thing. We're not going to have grades for this year. So here's what's going to happen. Crazy. We're going to use 2019 results, and then in 2021 go from 19 to 21 to see what that looks like in terms of growth. That's not two contiguous years. But who knows, because we're the legislators in session, and what's going to happen in terms of the different bills out there. So there's that, and then there's just, because that's crystal clear, then we do this. We overlay poverty levels and performance to see how do we compare with similarly structured school districts that have the same kind of demographics that we have. And they have the magic that they put on there to figure out the ABCD. So this is part of the methodology, the devil in the details, behind what is supposed to be a very simple system of K-12. Okay? That's what the whole theory behind it is. It's real simple to understand. Okay? We all understand K-12. The metrics and methodology is a very different story. That's part of what this is. Okay? You said TBA doesn't have a sense of humor. It's a very different math approach.
The scenes of how do you get to that A, B, C, D, or F? Because it's based on federal accountability standards, not the state standards. So an example would be in domain 1, the graduation rate, it takes the best of 4-year graduates, 5-year graduates, or 6-year graduates. In this domain, they only look at 4-year graduates. So it just adds, okay, you have to think, okay, what data set am I looking at to score this one? Because it's going to be different than the others, because this is agreed upon with our state and the federal government. The good news is it's all in one accountability system, but the interesting news is it's very challenging to meet and very challenging to figure out something. This is where they look at all those subpopulations. I know you guys have looked at those subpopulations in the past, but this is, there's some of that will come in. You can see some of them listed at the bottom of the slide. And do you want to go to the next slide? So here's what the student groups look like, the names of them. There's 14 student groups. Each of them measured with cut points, different cut points. And then there's some weighted components. And then you create, all of that happens magically, and then you get an A to F from that. And go ahead.
So the other thing here is not all of these groups are in your district. So in order to count the accountability system, you have to have at least 25 in each group, except for all students. But you're bigger than that, so obviously all students are always going to count. And I'm thinking, I wouldn't imagine that y'all have 25 Pacific Islanders. Do you? No, okay. So that would be one that you don't report on. You may have a child who is a Pacific Islander. The staff still looks at their results, still works with them, but in terms of the accountability system, they're not included in those results.
And they're not included because of privacy rights of that child. They could be easily identified with a small group.
Remind me, what were we doing prior to AP? Was it the academically acceptable campus before APF? Was that what we were doing?
Just the
I can't remember.
net standard
Net
or
standard.
improved required.
Yes,
That was the, those were the ladies.
and it was more of a pass-fail system. You either met the standard or you didn't.
And what, I'm just trying to remember what prompted this. I can't, it's been a while now.
This was in 2018, right? Yes. No, 2017 it was in the.
So I'll take a stab at it and then see the question. So it really reflected a national movement, part of an agenda, to make this so much easier to understand. And that if we just made it an A through F, everybody would understand it. So several states before us used it and then abandoned it before we chose to use it. And continue to use it. And still others have abandoned it. And fortunately, in the last legislative session, there is the agency has been working with some school districts to do local accountability because that makes more sense to those districts. But this was part of the national agenda. That's it. That's overgeneralized.
Yeah, that's a pretty good dance. The real answer is stupidity.
That would be the F.
It's supposed to be less complex, more straightforward, easier to understand, more useful. And,
So 0 out of 4 times 2, okay?
And
like Ed said, you heard that, I mean, there were several states in the United States that adopted this APF system, all abandoned it. They ended up experiencing what we're experiencing now, where now we didn't know before what standardized test data told us that we could operationalize and take action on. Now we really don't know. So that's why it's important that we have this as part of a more comprehensive, well-rounded accounting of our impact, which is what we know we really work hard and continue to try to work hard at building out.
so this just demonstrates the complexity of how that score comes. You can see that it's the best of either domain 1 or domain 2, but there's also a best of in domain 2. either school, academic growth or relative performance. 70%, the federal accountability counts 30%, and there you get your final grade. You do receive an a letter grade for each of the domains, even if it's not the best of.
All this falls in the category of math that Jonathan describes as voodoo. So we do the voodoo math, and then you get this. You heard Jonathan say that. In other words, I can't really explain it, so it's voodoo, but here's the output. Now we try to figure out what we can do with it.
And it's perfect. And, yes, it
I'm
does
sorry.
change. Because it changes every year.
Yes. Yes.
They don't
They don't tell you
you
what
change it until after you've already tested it.
Right, so you don't know upfront what it is.
So it's not like you know what the rules are. It's like, you're playing the game, they measure you, and then they say, now we're gonna play the rules on.
And that's a problem.
No, sir, no, sir. We got this, we got
We
this.
got this.
Yeah.
So this year, you're not gonna receive any A to F letter grades. You're going to receive just data on the test that's been administered.
So you'll get raw data, but it will not be scaled. So you can't compute with these. That's what we've been assured. You cannot compute what the grades would be. The other thing is, you want to make sure that these folks back here, as opposed to superintendent, they deal with this data daily. Okay? They massage this data, they work this data, whether you call it a war room, whether you call it, they're always following it, they're always looking at it. And so, as crazy as this sounds, this is stuff that they do on a daily basis and have through all the iterations of the accountability systems that we have, and all of the challenges. And the trend and pattern of accountability in the state of Texas is they throw stuff at us, and we start low and master it. And as soon as we master it, they change the rules. And they throw another thing at us, and we start low and we master it. Okay? Because, as Jonathan says, we don't have all of the rules. And in fact, in one of the cases, the first year this accountability system rolled out, they made a just minor change in July, like 2 weeks before the results were given to schools, that changed scores significantly for some school districts. And it was just like, oops, we made a change. And so it's not on the kids, it's not on the districts, it's just having this clear picture of what are the expectations. And so, and again, all the more reason to establish what we as a district want to hold ourselves accountable for, back to what you said at the very beginning, and what our community expects. Because the bottom line, and we have enough data even over a 45 to 50 year period, when they do a survey every year of parents. It's done by Kaplan. And they do that parents across the United States. Consistently over that time, they will rate their own local school system as A. They believe in their system. I don't know about the others. I read these horrible headlines about what's happening in our stuff, such a thing. I'm happy. And there's great truth in that. If they are happy with their local school, everything else is fine. That's really what parents want to know.
And evidence of that, in our region, Ed and I take all the calls of parents that are not quite so happy with things happening in districts. And after the first year the fees were released, we didn't get one call about an A or B or C or D or F school. Not one from any family that was unhappy or happy. Because they love their schools.
And truthfully, they don't understand it. I mean, it's just kind of like, it's the voodoo math that they're going, so how did they, because they're looking at, okay, not in this district. Okay, so our district said, gee, my kid's happy, they're learning, I'm happy, I love my school, I love my district, whatever. That's what's important. Okay? So, enough. So, can you share with us, and just please join in. So, when you went to construct your local and you looked at your school costs, So what was important to you guys? Because there's obviously teaching and learning was important. Obviously, a highly engaged workforce, there are things that you decided that are extremely important. So when you look at that scorecard, what were some of the things that you were looking at in that design? And I know you spent lots and lots of time, so we don't need an hour, but just a sense of, how you talk into that.
I can maybe speak to it briefly. So we looked at a bunch of different systems. So we looked at Marzano's research on high reliability schools. We looked at the effective school framework from CPA. And we looked at what our community said. So I know Mr. Brian and I were on the committee where we talked to the community about what we had. And we kind of put all the systems together and then we correlated them all. And what we came up with was a list. The short version of it has 4 priorities. So teaching, learning, environment, collaborative partnerships, and resource and operational excellence. And there's some sub stuff within some of those, but those are the 4 big overarching ones that you can see in all 4 of those systems.
And so, and y'all have had that in place for how long?
This is our second year?
Second year.
Second year. Okay,
Is that right?
Well, the
First iteration.
The scorecards with the.
Oh, yeah, before the full,
CPAS has been longer, but the scorecards have been 2 years.
and like that iteration of it. that was-
CBAS.
So that's.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yes, that's
Start doing all those privileges, right?
Yeah,
It's evolved over time.
I mean, we paid attention to what our community told us was important to them,
right.
okay? I mean, that's how we approached a community-based accountability system. We didn't decide it. Our community told us what was important to them, and then these professionals back here took that and said, okay, they said this is important, how do we measure it? How do we show that we're doing it? And that was the progress through our community-based accountability system. But we didn't try and do it all at once. We asked our community, here's 7 topics, pillars, if you will. Which one is the most important to you? And we started with that. And then we picked a couple more. And I don't even think we attacked all of them. Because one of them, the financial accountability, aligned with the first system. So we really didn't have to do much to that. We just put it in our format so that we could consistently report the results of all of our pillars to the community. So that they didn't see a mismatch in a reporting environment. And they didn't have this garbage to look at. Right? But we asked our community, what's important to you? And I can tell you right now that military ready piece of it, where you have to actually join the military to be military ready, stinks. You shouldn't have to join the military to be military ready. You should be eligible to join the military. And if that's that test, then so be it. But actually joining the military shouldn't be a part of that. Because there are lots of folks that join the military and jump the fence at boot camp.
Yeah, absolutely.
Eligible is the word.
Huh?
Eligible is the word.
I mean, well, that's how it's written.
It should be.
I mean, there's so many foundational things wrong with this accountability system that nobody in the business world would ever use this to determine whether their business is successful. So why do we use it for school?
So I think therein resides the issue that you mentioned, which is you design what works for your community.
Yeah.
But it's what they wanted, it's what you've delivered, okay? And it makes sense. And when you think that there are 1,200 school districts across the state, trying to find a single solution to do everything and make everybody happy is going to be fraught with, okay, nobody's happy, basically, when that happens. Okay. And so can we ask, how often do you report that out in terms of how y'all are doing?
Publicly, at the board level, we report quarterly.
Uh-huh.
And then
campus and department level across the district every week.
So,
On the agenda on our.
Yeah, so one of the biggest things to me in our progress through this journey is this, and I forget the official name of it, where you mark, what is it, where you mark where you are.
Signaling.
Signaling, yeah.
The
signaling?
Signaling.
Okay. If you're going to use the signaling process correctly, you can't be working this quarter. You gotta be working it every week, because that changes every week, so that you can change what you're doing to make sure that you're successful. I will tell you quite honestly, I don't know how to do it. There's so much going on here, but I know that they've taken what we put in place and what the state requires, and they married those things so that it is seamless isn't the right word, but it's much easier for them to take what our community expects and turn that into what the state expects, without having to go through the whole drill all over.
and it really seems organic, okay, and internalized to the degree of where it's just a part of how we do our business, which ultimately then makes it part of the culture. Is that fair?
If you call it organic, I call it common sense.
Okay.
Don't do the same thing 4 times. Figure out a way to do it once, where you meet 4 different requirements. That's common sense. And these folks have done that in exceptional.
I wanted to say earlier, when we get a chance to talk about stuff like this and look at things like this, and all the changes that happen every time we turn around, how they get everything together and get it down to the teacher level, and the teachers are teaching it, and we're seeing students succeed, is beyond me. I don't even know how. And I'll be quite frank, my daughter is a teacher here now, and she tells me some of the stuff that they're required to do. And I'm like, wow, that is incredible. And they have all these, things that they have to be on to word it. But I know it comes from up here. The planning, all of the plugins, everything, just all of it. And then it gets down to the classroom. And they're teaching it, and kids are passing. With all of that changing, it's just beyond me. Hats off. I'm always in awe of it. After 17 years, I still learn something all the time as to what their challenges are. So I wanted to say that earlier because it's really phenomenal.
Well, and it's affirming, because I do think that's extremely important that, this doesn't happen overnight. Y'all talked about how it started with grassroots, basically, and it takes time to put it in place. And yet, when it gets when it gets into such a rhythm, it becomes a part of life, a part of how we do, I think, what is it, the E-Central way? That's what it becomes part of. That's a beautiful thing. And here's the other thing I'm willing to bet is, I think we would both say that it probably was also a great insurance policy over the unprecedented 18 months. Because the other thing is, I'm willing to bet that in less than 7 days, last spring break, when you were taking, an extra few days, they would be impossible. Okay? Asking people, how many Zooms did we do before spring break last year? I didn't even know there was such a thing as Zoom. Okay? Now it's a way of life, but it had to, overnight. But again, when you have strong systems like a teaching and learning environment, the effectiveness, those kinds of things, you're setting people up for success.
It gives you the why behind everything. And why are we here? Why we do what we do? Which allows for that quick pivot to make those changes that were needed when COVID came out. When our lives all changed, especially the children's lives.
Having to teach in person and at the same time teach live and at the same time record for the teaching after hours is just, I mean, and our staff, and they hit the ground, it was implemented, the message got down to what the expectations were, and everybody stepped up, and it happened. They were available, whatever way you had to learn, all you need to do is show up, either in class, virtually, or do it after hours. But there was just, it got there, the information got there, the requirements, what we needed got there, and it was done. So I think that is a good sign of a good system.
And you maybe think of something else, that what happens in the boardroom happens in the classroom.
I'll also add, just going back to the slide that you originally started with the skills, the knowledge, and the mindset, we really know this would be possible without this board and their mindset. I mean, it is amazing that when we bring data or bring our scorecard, that you can tell they've looked at it, and that they are asking questions and they engage in the work and they want to know, how are we doing? What are our struggles? What's working well and what's not working well? And they push us on that. And they're super engaged in that. And it's very, for me, very rewarding that their authentic engagement and caring to the level that they care. I mean, it makes our work worthwhile. I mean, it's an amazing thing. And we couldn't do any of it if they didn't bring that and held that expectation for us. And I think it's incredible.
Wait, I agree with everything she said.
You agree?
I agree.
You agree?
She absolutely
What she said.
I mean it, because I tell people all the time, you should come to our board meetings and listen to the board engage.
Well, the way the
It's a
information
beautiful
is
thing.
led, like last time we saw the signaling page and the color coded thing, it makes you wanna, wow. It really engages us, and for me, it gives me an opportunity to really look at everything that's plugged in, and there's a pattern.
I'm not too happy with the color.
Not well.
We gotta work on symbols or something. We're gonna work in progress.
When we have a peach attachment, mine says peach on top.
There's to label your shirt. Makes your shirt still. You wanna do that anymore?
For every learner, there we go, help out every learner. So thank y'all for acknowledging that, because I think that's an important thing, and I agree with you. An effective board, that's where the leadership starts. Okay? I mean, there's no question about it. We joke, we were talking earlier, all of our negative examples come from Region 21. There's no reason for it. But because they have issues, trust us, we've been with them and they have issues. And a lot of them boil down to some of the things that you and I were talking about earlier when we started about, do they even respect each other? Can they even be in the same room other than when there's a board meeting? Because in some cases they can't. I mean, it's just incomprehensible to a lot, to you, I'm sure you're like, wow. But so that's so far away from focusing on the issues, having the deep conversations about and challenging staff. I mean, that's okay. It's about the issue. It's not about I don't like you or like you or whatever. That's somebody's. This is about again adult behavior and expectations. So
And it's about pushing each other so that the best is happening for the students. Never settling for, this is where we are. We want better.
So we're going to move on then to the second section, talking about goals. I know you already have seen this back in January in your work. But before we go there, we're going to do two things. First, any other comments or questions about your scorecard, how you're doing it, or anything that you want to share with us? Okay. The second thing is we would like to take an 8-minute break. So if it's okay, Mr. President, we will take an 8-minute break and then we will reconvene. That sounds good to me. Thank you, sir.
And it is 6:43.
thing that's a little interesting that's happened off the last legislative session, they did something that in my 43 years in education, they have never done, and I hope they don't do again. But they got very, very prescriptive districts about 3 specific student outcome goals they wanted to see in every single district. Okay? One around early reading, one around early math, and one around CCMR. I mean, they told you down to, here's what it will sound like, look like, and it will be 5 years in length, and all this stuff.
And gave you templates for everything. Which
So
is
that's
very
part,
unusual.
yeah, they have never done that before. So that wasn't from the agency, that was specifically from the last legislative session. So, but then we had this thing called COVID that hit, and it pushed things and deadlines and did all this kind of stuff. I believe Shannon did a presentation, has been doing presentations, but did a major one back in January when you guys adopted the House Bill 3 goals. So this is just a very quick review. We're going to talk about that, and then we're going to bring a couple of pieces together there. So any questions that you have about that, please feel free to ask. So it's predicated on student outcome goals. Again, what made these very different was they're trying to move away from just saying student learning will improve. Because that didn't have to prove how or by, how much, or there was no specificity in it. So they felt like there was a need to have a baseline, a target, a population, and a deadline. So they helped answer some of that by giving you steps.
So this is one of my favorite slides about how many goals should you have? We had a district in the state of Texas that had 264 goals.
But I don't have any of them.
That is wrong. And they're way over here on the right side where they're not, you can't achieve them. Research says, with Dr. Corby says, you can only achieve 1 to 3 goals. You can't focus on more than that and really achieve those high level goals. So 1 to 3. And so what did the state do? Early literacy, early mathematics, college career military.
And part of the reason behind the early literacy had to do with the goal that they established for higher ed, which is to have the idea of 60% by the year 2030 educated in the state, that they would increase the numbers of kids completing college, because they're abysmal, that kids would actually be working in areas that are marketable and have information about the marketability of their choices in college before they graduate. And then lastly, to reduce student debt because it is phenomenally high. So below that in this graphic is referred to the reading program. And basically, it's looking at, here's the components of an effective reading program, all of the things that are in here plus others. But they really focus on the blue language comprehension, and then in the yellow, the word recognition. Those are 2 major components of an effective reading program. So history lesson, back in the year 2000, this state started for the very first time reading academies. And what they did was they started with K. In the year 2000, kindergarten teachers across the state went for reading academy. Then the next year, first grade teachers. And then the next year, second grade teachers. And then third, fourth, all the way to fifth. But here's what was happening. The kids that were in kinder in the year 2000, guess what? Became the kids in 2001, 2002, second grade, 2003, third grade. So as their teachers were being taught skills around reading, we were going through the system, okay? Raising the kids all the way through. Because the truth of the matter is when you put an initiative in place, you need 12 years or 13 years if you're going to take it all the way through the system before you begin to see the results. Well, that worked for 5. You got to 2005 and then it got it. Okay. And We had some revivals of reading academies, but it really didn't stick. And so here it is now, the year 20, well, actually started in 2019. They wanted to bring reading academies back. And so they have done that. There's an expectation now that if you're going to teach in grades K through 3, you need to have attended one of these reading academies. If they're going to change the certificates, you have to have that training. Additionally, they wanted principals also to go through the training on an administrative strand of that to support teachers. So it's good, it is expensive, okay, and it is time consuming. There are two basic models. One is a comprehensive model that really takes about a year to go through. And there's another that's a blended and is more geared towards those who are more confident in their reading background. So we have reading specialists, for example, and they have masters in reading. So again, the idea is to begin to support the instruction around effective reading. So I don't know, what model did y'all decide to go with?
Well, so we had originally said comprehensive, but due to COVID this year, most of them didn't offer comprehensive. And so we went blended, but we will be moving to comprehensive next year. So we did blended this year, but we tried to supplement it as much as we could during the school day.
Is one of those programs called Letters?
So Letters is a phonics program,
Okay.
and the Reading Academy deals with phonics. It's not the program Letters, but teaches the science of reading that Letters is built on. Does that make sense?
What's that? Goal 1, students to 30. What percentage of our students now are registered?
Well, this isn't kids, this is the general population.
Well, the kids become part
Right.
of the population. I mean, eventually, the working, living, et cetera. But what percent are we now? I mean, are these kids going to school not getting education?
So what I would say, that's two different questions. So what I hear is the question about our kids graduating from our schools being literate, okay? And is that percentage increasing? And I would say, yes, it is. Okay? Because here's the other thing, we're educating more kids because back, like I'm just gonna say 50s, back in the 50s, we encouraged kids to choose other paths. We didn't educate everybody. The belief is we did, but we didn't. Okay. So it appears that everybody that graduated was not, but yeah. And so what has happened over time is we've become responsible for educating a lot more kids. Okay. And the numbers that are graduating literacy, the illiterate level, okay, reading on grade level, is increasing. Okay. Now remember, because, let me just give an example. We are responsible for educating kids that have special needs, and they actually be non-communicative. Okay? They're not going to be literate from our standard definition, but we still have responsibility to educate them to the extent possible. So they're not going to graduate literate, but they're going to graduate hopefully functional. And I'm just refer to that as fair description. So, but the bigger question has become, and here I think is a fundamental shift. Talk about a different mindset. So about 20 years ago, the mindset was if you graduated from high school, that's good enough. That was, that didn't mean you just stopped there, but I mean, that was like, that was it. Over time, that has increased to be, first it was college. Now I think it's a little more balanced between college and career or skill area. So it could be a college degree, it could be an associate's degree, it could be some kind of licensure or certification. And to me, that's a more balanced approach. Or it could be both. Okay? So in other words, you went and you along the way picked up a welding certificate. You could be a welder, but you went on to become a lawyer or whatever. I mean, it's just this idea that you never stop learning, and that high school is a here is the comparison of the early literacy and mathematics side by side with the CCMR.
And you'll see a lot of the things that Ed talked about in the beginning around this, where the goals need to be 5 years on both sides. They need to have annual targets, they need to, at least one administrator at the district level is overseeing it. They need to be reviewed at least one time a year, but you guys are reviewing way more than that. And that, they have to have plans associated with them in the line and on their website. And then, as I talked about the Reading Academy, you see on the left side at the bottom, it says that there is that Reading Academy as targeted professional development. That's what we're calling it. Because when we all know that when these children can read, they're going to be much on grade level, by third grade, they're going to be much more successful than if they cannot read on grade level. Because that math problem that we looked at earlier, a lot of reading in that. A lot of understanding of what language is said.
So here's the good news. If you look at all these bullets, 75% of them, if not more, you are already doing. You already had an annual report. You already have somebody that's in charge of this. It was just this. You already were publishing. You're required to put it on your website. So even though it looks like, oh God, we got more to do, it's stuff you're already doing. The things that were really different, 5-year goals, okay, because generally weren't going out 5 years, and specificity around reading, math, and CCMR.
And
The only other thing I would add, and we're going to look at it, is your district plans already had reading and math in them. Okay.
and then they put it in the law, so you can see it falls into chapter 11 of statute now.
So one of the big questions often we get is, well, how do we put this together with our regular work? Okay. The good news is you have masters that know how to do that part. And it really is, this is what the legislature's intent, the spirit was, to ask the school board to focus on these 3 big buckets, if you will. What's happening in my 3rd grade in reading, what's happening in math by 3rd grade, and what's happening at the high school in CCMR. Meanwhile, back at the ranch, a ton of stuff is happening at each campus, and not only in English and math and science and social studies and electives and all, it's happening all across. There are expectations, but not everything rises to the level of the board. On the frequency that you're looking at for the year, because my understanding is you're at least getting quarterly reports on your reading, your math, and your CCMR. And probably even more quickly. I mean, and we know, just based on what we heard earlier, they're looking at the campus level on a weekly basis. Not just these, but every single priority of the system in the plan. That's exemplary. Okay, so y'all are beyond the spirit of the law from that perspective. Questions or comments about this?
Did you say earlier that the reading requirement was going to be folded into the teacher certification process?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So before we get a teacher now, they're going to already have these reading academies, and we don't have to put them through them. Is that what I'm hearing?
That would be the idea. So we're going to go through a transition period of where there are people, some of which will do, some of which will need, but eventually, everyone will have to have it in order to keep their certificate. Right now, initially, I think they were looking at 2023.
That's what they're adding the college courses. So when they come out of college, they'll come with it. But until then, we'll have to fill the gap. And then if we get somebody that's experienced from another district that hasn't gone through it, we'll have to take it through it.
Yes.
That's
So
the
at
whole
some point, we've got to get teachers who are ready to teach.
Yes.
We don't need to teach them how to teach.
Right.
That should be the college's
Yes, let's do it again. Absolutely.
Yes,
Yeah. I mean, and truthfully, that one comment has been decades about so many other areas.
The legislature seems to love to tell us what to do, but they don't want to tell our upper education, which is also publicly funded, what they should do. So at some point,
in their education.
Absolutely. Other questions or comments? I'm gonna skip this, you already designed it in your goals. So I'm gonna skip through this, but basically, just a quick, this is how goals will look. This is how they were designed. This is how you already have it. We're gonna look actually at the ones that y'all did. These, all AA, all the way across are the different student groups. So all students, African American, sorry.
Asian, Hispanic,
Yes.
Pacific Islander, people races.
And so what's happening is you're gonna see, and some of the templates we're gonna show you, some are blank because you don't have the 25 required, but they're still looking. If there's a kid in your system that fits in one of these categories, the schools are still responsible. So I'm gonna break out of this one for a second here
And look at this.
and bring it there. We're gonna start with.
I've seen these before, so this is
Yeah.
what you're asking about. Actually, approaches, but I mean, needs some masters, not approaches. But that was just something. All right. We would not master. Oh, we're gonna have to resubmit eventually.
Oh, for the papers.
But you navigate this.
I didn't give him that access.
Yeah,
Just kidding.
yeah, I know.
I'm just kidding.
That large enough for you guys?
Mhm.
So you can see the first one, this is early literacy, the percent of third grade students, that score meets. Grade level or above on STAR will increase, and you have it by 2024. And you can see the yearly targets like they were describing. And then, and the closing the gaps, looking at your yearly targets there. You can see the subpopulations, American Indian, Asian, Pacific Islander, continuously low and not continuously low. You didn't have enough kiddos in those subpopulations to make a group. You have to report out, but staff is still watching the students that fall within those groups.
So just a nuance on this one, so let me pick, so EL, so English language learners. So in third grade, roughly, do you know how many students that might be? This ballpark.
So if you have, let's say, 800 kids in grade level, so a third of 800.
260.
Okay, all right, okay. So the numbers, the end, if you will, for each one of these categories is different. Okay, that's just the idea that the all students is going to be the largest number, and then you may not have. So here's the reason that's important. The smaller the n, their performance has a bigger impact on the category. So let's say we have 1,000 kids, and one kid doesn't do well, that barely does this in terms of moving the needle either way, positive or negative. If the category only has 50 kids, the one kid has a huge impact going one way or the other. So just, that's also important when we begin to look at these and saying what the end is for each of those categories. And that's why also you'll see that maybe some wide swings in numbers because of the total end, if you will, for a particular category.
So here's the progress measure, you want the progress measures or goals?
This is on the first one.
Yes.
Okay, let's keep it on the price. So the question is, so how do we know those what Deanna was talking about, the road signs along the way. So one of the things that y'all are looking at is a particular, it's the goal assessment that y'all are using. That's kind of telling us along the way how we're doing.
And you're looking at the pre-K students, so that if pre-K is meeting standards that you've established, they're more likely to meet standard in third grade. So you want to make sure that you're looking at that over time by grade level to see that they're making that progress they need to be. The next one is.
Then it gets to campuses.
Yeah.
So now you're in the, it's every specific campus goal. And then this is all literacy, and then it goes to math. So math right there. Go over one left to left.
So math, percent of third grade students that meet grade level, meets or above on STAR, you have all the points there. And then looking here at the.
At the different groups, so you're looking at, yeah.
And
So,
you're targets.
so you've heard all of this before, okay? So the whole idea is, this is the stuff that these folks do well. The important thing then becomes the next step is, so when do we hear those reports? How are we doing? Whether it's the color coding or the signaling or the whatever you call it, that's called monitoring. How are we monitoring it and how often are we doing it? So you guys are obviously doing it at the board level on a quarterly basis. At the campus level, they're apparently doing it on a weekly basis, and at the cabinet level, somewhere in there. So that whole idea that you've got many eyes on this, that's the issue. The legislature asked you to monitor at least one time. Not a way beyond that. Okay?
And you were already doing it one time a year when the reports came out.
So there's the early childhood math, we talked about the reading, the CCMR.
Right.
Yeah,
Keep going.
That one.
Don't touch it, Ed.
yeah, don't touch it. I know my limitations. Step away.
I think more important than us monitoring this one time a year
There is.
is the fact that we get a report twice a year on not only where we are, but what changes are being made to either increase the target or make sure we meet the target. Because the planning, the initial planning is one thing, the project, but as that becomes executed, sometimes those plans need to change. And that's a critical part of what we do, is understanding what adjustments have been made to the initial plan and how those adjustments are now actually impacting the outcome.
Absolutely, spot on. So that's, it's the so what.
Yeah.
And once you get the information, so what? Either what we learned, what we need to do differently, or what do we need to continue to do in order to experience that success. Absolutely. So again, that you're absolutely right. That is what is so significant and important. And that, coming back to your very first comment when we started this evening, that's accountability. That's about what, I mean, that's where it is. And that's what our community expects. That's what the board expects. Back to Deanne's comment, another example of what starts in the boardroom, it should be mirrored and is mirrored, not only in the classroom, but at the administrative level and all throughout the system. That's what makes the system stronger. Well, that's a great point. Any other comments or questions? Okay, so I'm gonna this one go back to the presentation here. Second, so okay, so all of these slides, we already took a look at, we drilled down into the goal progress measure. We've already looked at. Here are examples of basically what we need to look at, but we already have it. We've got it taken care of. So we're going to skip through all that. So here's the monitoring calendar. Okay? And basically, what you described, what everybody has described as the 4 times, multiple times, is kind of when can we expect it. The next important piece is this, the monitoring calendar, or you call it signaling or whatever it is. Because what you can't see on this chart is that little step at the very bottom that says, and this is what we're going to do about it. You
The
know?
most important part, what are we gonna do about it?
Yeah.
At the bottom.
Honestly, guys, this is the enhanced paper. So y'all get a paper report every year that's roughly about 28 to 36 pages in length, and it's numbers. It's numbers, okay? All right. This is kind of like the executive summary that says this is how we're doing, and more importantly, what are we doing? Keep it going, or do we need to adjust? It's constant adjustments on that. We do it basically the budget in terms of numbers. This is doing the same thing with performance.
And y'all perfectly described this earlier tonight when you were talking about, how you ask the questions of staff and how staff, they work together on that, push each other. So it's being demonstrated.
Absolutely. And then we're going to leave you with this thought that student outcomes don't change until results are behavior. And basically, what we all have put in place of strengthening the decisions that go into
Buy-in and support, and you're representing their values and commitments to the district.
So as I check my clock, we're a little short on time. But here's what we're going to do. It is my understanding that we now get to this back in January, and I think presented and Jonathan presented as well. That was roughly about 40 minutes worth of time. I believe that y'all have already done 2 updates.
We do another one next week.
And you have another one next week, which are at least 10 minutes, So I think we're well over the time that we are short. So if there is no objection, we will count that time as part of the training. And we'll bring this up to the meeting.
But you have demonstrated that you have already, in terms, you're already doing this, so. Quite evident. Nice job.
Well done. So any objections to taking that approach? Nope. Okay. Feel like,
We've got a question. We'll talk about it later.
All right, are there any other questions or comments that you have?
Earlier when you started back in church, you said, students with years in a different direction. I remember that several high schools had, machine shop, auto body, and mechanics. And allowing the kids to get scared. I worked with a fellow who said he wanted to go to counselor. He wanted to go into engineering. And that counselor said, no, you need to go, you really should go into history. I said, no, I want to go. And when I worked with him, I was an engineer. So you had that mindset that these kids need to go this way, whether they want to or not, this is what they were pushing. And yes, we need mechanics, we need plumbing, absolutely. None of us, that's where all these things.
Right.
But it has to be a personal choice. It can't be dictated by us. It's like you telling your child, I want you to play baseball, and say, I don't like it. I want you to play baseball, but I like baseball. Well, you can't live your life through that child. It's the same thing with a student. You can't force him or encourage him to go in this direction, but you have to know he or she has no desire to go in that direction. So we've changed that mindset. This is available. What do you want to do? And sometimes you may go into college as an accounting major and find out that you can't add 2 and 2, but you got to go in this direction. So that's the kind of choice that you have to present to the kids. Let them, so they're growing. So let them kind of experience some of this and then decide out there and do happily and together.
So it's about giving kids options, arming them with options so they can make choices. Because at age 14, 16, even 18, then you think they're home. And we know, just looking at the statistics from kids that go on to 2 and 4 year institutions, there are a lot that don't make it, they got that, but come back. There are kids that when they're 23, 23, 24, if they went out there, they didn't do things, and they said, you know, I think I want to go back and try something to be confident with. So now the situation is, obviously during this last couple months, it's a great time to be a licensed plumber. But you can also pursue a college degree. Okay? So again, it's about having the best of both worlds. Absolutely.
Yes, so they're absolutely prepared for whatever choice they want to make.
Any other questions? And certainly turning back to you for Jim.
Thank you very much. I appreciate y'all coming and doing this thing. Really appreciate it. And take a lot out of y'all today.
Thanks for inviting us.
Yes.
All right, we can move on to adjourn. All in favor? All opposed? We're done.
Thank you. Thank you all. It's very enjoyable. Sorry.
Yeah, we got it.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Okay.
I don't know why I was doing that.
Maybe two facilities, two.
This is her. Share that.